The desert sun beat down mercilessly on the compound walls as Lieutenant Sarah Chun crouched behind a concrete barrier, her heart pounding against her tactical vest. The radio crackled with urgent voices from the SEAL team positioned 300 meters away. What had started as a routine reconnaissance mission in the remote hills of Afghanistan had quickly spiraled into something far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. "Control, this is Alpha Team Leader," came the strained voice of Commander Jake Morrison through her earpiece. "We've got a situation here. Multiple hostiles have taken defensive positions on the ridge. Estimate 50 to 60 tangos with high ground advantage." Sarah pressed herself closer to the wall, feeling the rough concrete scrape against her cheek. She had been assigned to this joint operation as a military intelligence specialist, tasked with gathering information about suspected terrorist activity in the region. Her role was supposed to be observational, staying back with the support team while the SEALs handled the tactical operations. But now, with the enemy having spotted their approach and gained superior positioning, everything had changed. The compound they were investigating sat like a fortress on a rocky outcrop, surrounded by natural caves and defensive positions that had been carved into the mountainside over decades of conflict. Intelligence reports had suggested it was being used as a training facility and weapons cache, but the briefings had underestimated both the number of militants present and their level of preparation. Commander Morrison's voice came through again, this time with an edge of frustration that Sarah had never heard before. "Sniper teams are having difficulty acquiring targets. The angle is wrong from our position. These guys are dug in deep, and they've got overlapping fields of fire covering all our approach routes." Sarah could hear the distant crack of rifle fire echoing off the canyon walls. The SEALs were some of the most elite marksmen in the world, but even their skills were being tested by the challenging terrain and the enemy's tactical advantage. The militants had chosen their position well, using the natural geography to create a nearly impregnable defensive network. "We need to fall back and call in air support," came another voice over the radio. "This is turning into a shooting gallery, and we're the targets." But Sarah knew that air support was hours away. The remote location meant that any helicopters or aircraft would need time to reach them, time that the SEALs might not have. She could see the tactical situation unfolding in her mind like a chess game, each move and counter-move playing out with deadly consequences. From her position, Sarah had a different angle than the SEAL snipers. The support team had been positioned on a lower elevation to the east, initially chosen for its concealment rather than its tactical value. But as she studied the ridgeline where the enemy fighters had positioned themselves, she began to notice something that the SEALs couldn't see from their location. The militants had made one crucial error in their defensive setup. They had focused their attention on the primary approach routes, creating overlapping fields of fire that effectively blocked any direct assault. But in doing so, they had exposed themselves to a flanking position that only someone from Sarah's vantage point could exploit. She pulled out her binoculars and began a systematic scan of the enemy positions. Years of training and tactical analysis had taught her to read terrain like a book, to understand how geography could be both a weapon and a weakness. What she saw made her pulse quicken with possibility. The enemy fighters were positioned in a rough semicircle along the ridge, each group supporting the others in a textbook defensive formation. But they had positioned themselves to face the SEALs' approach from the north and west. From Sarah's position to the east, she could see the profiles and even the backs of many of the fighters as they focused their attention on the immediate threat. More importantly, she realized that many of the enemy positions were clustered together in groups of 3 or 4 fighters sharing the same piece of cover. They had prioritized protection from the SEALs' direction of attack over dispersion, creating what military tacticians call target-rich environments for anyone with the right angle and the skills to exploit it. Sarah's mind raced as she calculated distances and angles. The range was challenging, but not impossible. More critically, she began to see a sequence of targets that could be engaged in rapid succession if executed perfectly. Take out the heavy weapons crew first, then the communications team, then work through the supporting positions in a pattern that would create maximum confusion and disruption. But there was one significant problem. Sarah wasn't a sniper. Her training was in intelligence gathering and analysis, not precision marksmanship. While she was competent with various weapons as part of her basic military training, she had never been trained for the kind of long-range precision shooting that this situation demanded. The radio crackled again with increasing urgency. Alpha Team to Control, we need options here. The enemy is starting to maneuver. If they get into those caves behind them, we'll never dig them out. Sarah could see what the SEAL team leader was referring to. The militants were beginning to realize that their current positions, while defensively strong, could become a trap if they stayed too long. Some of the fighters were already beginning to move toward a series of cave entrances that would provide them with even better cover and multiple escape routes. Control to Alpha Team, air support is still 45 minutes out. Can you maintain position? The pause before Morrison's response spoke volumes. Negative. Control. We're taking accurate fire from multiple positions. We're going to have casualties if we stay here much longer. Sarah felt the weight of the moment settling on her shoulders. She understood military tactics well enough to know that once the enemy fighters reached those caves, the entire dynamic would shift. They could hold out indefinitely, turn this into a prolonged siege, or simply disappear through the tunnel networks that honeycombed these mountains. She looked down at her standard M4 carbine, a weapon designed for close to medium-range engagements, not precision long-range shooting. The distances involved were at the outer limits of what the weapon could handle effectively, even with optimal conditions and an expert marksman. But as Sarah continued to study the tactical situation, she noticed something that changed everything. Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, one of the SEAL snipers, was positioned about 30 meters to her left, partially concealed behind a cluster of rocks. She could see his distinctive M40A6 sniper rifle, a weapon capable of the precision and range needed for the shots she was envisioning. The problem was that Rodriguez was pinned down by enemy fire, unable to move to a position where he could effectively engage the targets. From his current location, he had the same limited angle of attack as the rest of his team. The weapon that could solve their tactical problem was trapped in a position where it couldn't be used effectively. Sarah's heart began to race as an idea formed in her mind. It was audacious, potentially foolish, and definitely outside the bounds of her assigned role in this operation. But as she watched the enemy fighters continuing their movement toward the caves, she realized that conventional approaches were not going to work. The radio chattered with increasingly desperate tactical assessments from the SEAL team. They were professional enough not to panic, but Sarah could hear the underlying tension in their voices. These were men who had successfully completed some of the most dangerous missions in military history. But even they had limitations when facing a well-prepared enemy in ideal defensive terrain. Sarah made her decision. She keyed her radio to the frequency used by the SEAL team, knowing that what she was about to say would either be dismissed immediately or change the entire course of the engagement. Alpha Team, this is intelligence asset, Sean, she said, using her formal designation to establish credibility. I have a different angle on the target area. Request permission to attempt precision engagement from current position. The radio fell silent for a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity. Sarah could almost picture Commander Morrison trying to process what she had just said. Intelligence specialists didn't typically request permission to engage in sniper operations, especially not in situations where trained SEALs were having difficulty. Repeat that. Intelligence asset, came Morrison's voice, carefully controlled but clearly surprised. I can see target opportunities from my position that are not visible from your location, Sarah continued, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. Enemy fighters are exposed to flanking fire from my angle. I count approximately 50 targets in clustered positions suitable for rapid sequential engagement. Another pause, longer this time. Sarah could imagine the quick tactical conference happening among the SEAL team leaders as they tried to evaluate this unexpected development. Intelligence asset, what is your background with precision marksmanship? Morrison's question was direct and professional, but Sarah could hear the underlying skepticism. This was the moment of truth. Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would determine whether she would be given the chance to potentially change the outcome of this engagement or be ordered to maintain her position and stay out of the way. Limited formal training, but extensive theoretical knowledge of long-range tactics and target prioritization, she replied honestly. However, I believe the tactical advantage of my position outweighs experience limitations. The silence that followed seemed to last forever. In the background, Sarah could hear the ongoing gunfight, the sharp cracks of rifle fire echoing off the canyon walls as both sides continued to exchange shots without decisive advantage. Finally, Morrison's voice came through the radio again, and Sarah could hear the weight of command decision in his tone. What do you need, intelligence asset? Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she spoke the words that would either mark her as completely insane or potentially save the mission. I need access to Sergeant Rodriguez's rifle. The request hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield, impossible to take back once spoken. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat in her ears as she waited for Morrison's response, knowing that what she was asking went against every protocol and procedure in the military handbook. Rodriguez, what's your status? Morrison's voice crackled through the radio. Pinned down hard, sir, came the sergeant's reply, punctuated by the whine of bullets passing close to his position. I can't get an angle on anything from here. These bastards have me locked down tight. Sarah could see Rodriguez's position from where she crouched. He was trapped behind a formation of rocks that provided excellent protection, but severely limited his field of view. Every time he tried to move to get a better angle, enemy fire forced him back into cover. The precision weapon that could potentially turn the tide of the engagement was effectively neutralized by his tactical situation. Rodriguez, can you get your rifle to Intelligence Asset Chin's position? Morrison asked, his voice carrying the weight of a commander making a decision that went against every instinct and regulation he had been taught. There was a pause before Rodriguez responded, and Sarah could almost picture him trying to process the unprecedented nature of the request. Sir, that's highly irregular. She's not sniper qualified. I'm aware of the irregularities, Sergeant, Morrison replied tersely. But we're rapidly running out of conventional options. Can you get the weapon to her position or not? Sarah studied the terrain between her location and Rodriguez's rocky shelter. The distance was manageable, but crossing it would require both of them to expose themselves to potential enemy fire. The militants on the ridge had demonstrated their marksmanship skills repeatedly over the past 20 minutes, and any movement in the open was an invitation to become a target. I can make it to his position, Sarah transmitted, her voice steadier than she felt. Covered approach using the drainage ditch to my left. She had noticed the shallow channel earlier when studying the terrain for potential enemy infiltration routes. It was barely 3 feet deep, carved by years of seasonal runoff, but it provided a concealed path that would allow her to reach Rodriguez's position without exposing herself to direct observation from the ridge. Negative. Morrison's response was immediate and firm. You stay in position. Rodriguez, can you move the weapon to her? The SEAL sniper's voice came back with reluctant professionalism. I could try, sir. But if I leave this cover, I'm going to draw a lot of attention. Sarah could see the tactical problem clearly. Rodriguez's movement would certainly be noticed by the enemy fighters, who had already demonstrated their ability to respond quickly to any change in the SEAL's positioning. But there was an opportunity in that attention. Commander, I have a suggestion, Sarah transmitted. If Rodriguez moves toward my position, it will draw enemy focus to the eastern flank. That might give your snipers the distraction they need to acquire some of their targets. It was a sound tactical principle. Create attention in one area to reduce vigilance in another. But it also meant using Rodriguez as a potential target to create that distraction, a calculation that weighed one man's safety against the mission's success. Morrison's voice carried the burden of command when he responded. Rodriguez, your call. Can you make that movement? The sergeant's answer came without hesitation, displaying the kind of courage that had made him a SEAL. Roger that, sir. Moving now. Sarah watched as Rodriguez prepared for his dangerous sprint across open ground. He gathered his gear, checked his weapon, and mentally rehearsed the route that would take him from his current cover to her position. It was a distance of perhaps 40 meters, but those 40 meters might as well have been a mile given the enemy's elevated position and clear fields of fire. On my mark, Rodriguez transmitted, his voice calm despite the danger he was about to face. 3, 2, 1, moving. The SEAL exploded from his cover with the fluid motion of a trained warrior, moving in a serpentine pattern designed to make him a difficult target. Immediately, the ridge line erupted with gunfire as multiple enemy fighters shifted their attention to the running figure below. Sarah held her breath as she watched Rodriguez sprint toward her position, his heavy sniper rifle held across his body as he navigated the broken terrain. Bullets kicked up dirt around his feet and whined off the rocks, but his years of training showed in every step as he used every available piece of cover to break up the enemy's aim. Alpha Team snipers, you've got reduced observation on the ridge. Morrison's voice cut through the gunfire. Multiple targets shifting position to engage Rodriguez. Sarah could see it happening exactly as she had predicted. The enemy fighters were reacting to the immediate threat of Rodriguez's movement, temporarily reducing their vigilance in other directions as they focused their fire on the running SEAL. It was a brief window, but potentially enough for the other SEAL snipers to acquire some targets. The distinctive crack of precision rifles began to sound from the SEAL positions as Morrison snipers took advantage of the distraction. She's been with me for 3 deployments, and she's never let me down. But I've got to tell you, she's a temperamental lady who doesn't like strangers. Sarah took the weapon with reverent care, immediately struck by its weight and the precision of its construction. This wasn't just a rifle. It was a carefully crafted instrument designed for a very specific and deadly purpose. The scope alone probably cost more than her monthly salary, and the weapon's custom modifications spoke of countless hours of fine-tuning by an expert marksman. The scope is zeroed for my shooting style, Rodriguez explained rapidly, his voice taking on the professional tone of an instructor. You'll need to adjust for your eye relief and shooting position. Trigger pull is set at 3.5 pounds, smooth as silk, but don't get careless with it. Sarah nodded, running her hands over the weapon's familiar yet foreign contours. She had trained with various rifles during her military education, but never anything approaching this level of precision equipment. The difference between this and her standard M4 was like comparing a surgeon's scalpel to a butter knife. What's your experience with long-range shooting? Rodriguez asked, his voice carrying professional curiosity mixed with obvious concern. Qualified marksman with standard weapons, Sarah replied honestly. But nothing at this range or with this level of precision required. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, studying her face with the intensity of someone trying to evaluate capabilities under pressure. The fundamentals are the same, he said finally. Breathing, trigger control, follow through. But at these distances, everything gets magnified. A tiny flinch becomes a complete miss. Sarah positioned herself behind the rifle, adjusting the stock and scope to accommodate her smaller frame and different shooting style. Through the powerful optics, the enemy positions on the ridge suddenly seemed much closer, close enough that she could see individual faces and equipment details that had been invisible to her naked eye. Range to the primary targets? She asked, settling into a prone shooting position that felt both familiar and completely foreign at the same time. 600 to 700 meters to the main defensive line, Rodriguez replied, pulling out a small rangefinder. Wind is variable, maybe 5 to 8 knots from the southwest. Elevation change is significant. You're shooting uphill, which affects bullet trajectory. The technical details were daunting, but Sarah forced herself to focus on the tactical picture rather than the mechanical challenges. Through the scope, she could see that her earlier assessment had been correct. From this angle, many of the enemy positions were exposed in ways that the SEAL snipers couldn't exploit from their locations. I can see 26 definite targets from this position, she reported, her voice taking on the clinical tone she used for intelligence analysis. Multiple clusters of 3 to 4 fighters sharing cover. Heavy weapons team at approximately 2 o'clock, communications setup at 10 o'clock. Rodriguez whistled softly. That's more targets than we've been able to positively identify from our positions. The angle really does make that much difference. Sarah continued her systematic scan of the enemy positions, using her intelligence training to catalog threats and prioritize targets. The heavy weapons team needs to be the first priority. They've got what looks like a PCAM machine gun setup that's been keeping your team's heads down. Agreed, Rodriguez nodded. Take out the crew-served weapons first, then work on the leadership and communications. Standard target prioritization. But even as Sarah studied the targets through the powerful scope, she was acutely aware of her limitations. She could see the shots that needed to be made, could understand the tactical requirements, but translating that knowledge into actual precision marksmanship was an entirely different challenge. Rodriguez, she said quietly, her voice carrying a vulnerability she rarely allowed herself to show. I need you to walk me through this. I can see what needs to be done, but I've never actually made shots like this before. The SEAL sergeant's expression softened slightly, and Sarah could see understanding in his eyes. Ma'am, you've already shown more tactical awareness than most people ever develop. The shooting part is just mechanics. I'll talk you through every shot. The radio crackled with Morrison's voice, urgent and demanding. Chin, what's your status? Enemy is starting to move toward those caves. We need to act now or lose this opportunity entirely. Sarah felt the weight of the moment settling on her shoulders like a heavy blanket. Through the scope, she could see that Morrison was right. Several groups of enemy fighters were beginning to disengage from their current positions and move toward the cave entrances that would provide them with nearly impregnable defensive positions. "Beginning engagement now," she transmitted, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Rodriguez positioned himself beside her, close enough to observe her technique, but far enough away not to interfere with her shooting position. "Remember, ma'am, you control time out here. Don't let the pressure rush you into making bad shots. Better take your time and make each shot count." Sarah nodded, forcing her breathing to slow and deepen as she had been taught in basic marksmanship training. Through the scope, the first target came into focus with crystal clarity. 3 enemy fighters manning a PCAM machine gun that had been raking the SEAL positions with devastating accuracy. 700 meters to the machine gun nest, Rodriguez said softly. "Aim for the gunner first center mass, just below the chest rig. The gun shield will protect him from frontal shots, but you've got a perfect angle on his left side." Sarah settled the crosshairs on her first target, a bearded fighter who was in the process of adjusting the machine gun's position. At this distance, magnified through the powerful scope, she could see individual details of his equipment and clothing. It was a level of clarity that made the reality of what she was about to attempt both more real and more daunting. "When you're ready," Rodriguez whispered. "Slow, steady squeeze. Let the shot surprise you." Sarah's finger found the trigger with delicate precision, applying pressure so gradually that she almost didn't realize when the rifle fired. The weapon's report was sharp and authoritative, followed immediately by the distinctive sound of the bolts cycling as Rodriguez had trained her. Through the scope, she watched as her first target stumbled and fell away from the machine gun, his hands clutching at his side where her bullet had found its mark. "Clean hit," Rodriguez whispered, his voice carrying professional approval mixed with surprise. "The gunner's down. Move to the loader. He's reaching for the weapon." Sarah's hands moved with mechanical precision, working the bolt to chamber another round while keeping her eye focused through the scope. The second target, the machine gun's ammunition handler, was indeed reaching desperately for the weapon as he realized his partner had been hit. Through the magnified optics, she could see the panic in his movements as he tried to understand where the shot had come from. 6 inches left, same elevation, Rodriguez coached quietly. "He doesn't know you're there yet. Take your time." The second shot came more naturally than the first, Sarah's body already adapting to the rifle's characteristics and recoil pattern. The loader dropped beside his companion, and suddenly, the machine gun that had been terrorizing the SEAL positions fell silent. "Outstanding shooting," Rodriguez said, his voice carrying genuine respect. 2 for 2 at 700 meters with an unfamiliar weapon. "You sure you haven't done this before?" But Sarah was already moving to her next target, her mind operating with the cold efficiency she had developed during years of intelligence analysis. The third member of the machine gun crew was scrambling toward a radio, undoubtedly trying to alert the other positions that they were taking fire from an unexpected direction. "Communications," she murmured, settling the crosshairs on the figure hunched over the radio equipment. "Can't let him coordinate a response." The third shot silenced the radio operator before he could transmit his warning, but Sarah could already see the effects of her first 2 shots rippling through the enemy positions. Other fighters were beginning to look around nervously, trying to understand why their heavy weapons team had suddenly gone quiet. "Alpha Team, this is Chun," she transmitted while working the bolt again. "Machine gun neutralized. Beginning systematic engagement of supporting positions." Morrison's voice came back immediately, filled with a mixture of relief and amazement. "Confirmed, Chun. We can see the effect from here. That gun was keeping us pinned down hard. Outstanding work." Through the scope, Sarah could see the tactical situation beginning to shift in their favor. With the machine gun silenced, the SEAL snipers were starting to maneuver to better positions, taking advantage of the reduced suppressive fire from the ridge. But she also knew that her window of opportunity was closing rapidly as the enemy fighters began to realize they were under attack from a new direction. "Next target cluster at 10 o'clock, Rodriguez guided, pointing toward a group of 4 fighters positioned behind a rocky outcropping. "They're starting to figure out where you are. See how they're turning toward your position." Sarah could indeed see the enemy fighters beginning to orient themselves toward her location. Their training and experience were allowing them to rapidly deduce the general direction of the incoming fire based on the wounds of their fallen comrades, and the sound of the rifle reports echoing off the canyon walls. "How long before they start shooting back?" she asked, settling her aim on the closest of the 4 targets. Not long, Rodriguez replied grimly. Maybe 30 seconds before they get organized enough to return accurate fire. You need to thin them out fast. Sarah's fourth shot took down the apparent leader of the group, a man who had been gesturing and shouting orders to the others. The psychological effect was immediate and devastating. The remaining 3 fighters dove for cover, their coordinated response dissolving into individual survival instincts. Follow up, Rodriguez urged. Don't give them time to regroup. The 5th and 6th shots came in rapid succession, Sarah's confidence growing with each successful engagement. The rifle that had seemed so foreign and intimidating just minutes earlier was beginning to feel like an extension of her body, its weight and balance becoming familiar through repetition and adrenaline. Movement at your 2 o'clock, Rodriguez warned, his voice suddenly tense. 4 fighters with an RPG setup. They're trying to get an angle on the SEAL positions. Sarah swung the rifle toward the new threat, her scope finding the rocket-propelled Grenade team as they maneuvered a portable launcher into position. The RPG could devastate the SEAL team's positions with a single well-placed shot, turning their cover into deadly shrapnel and exposing them to follow-up attacks. Range 800 meters, Rodriguez calculated quickly. Elevated target, strong crosswind. This is a challenging shot, even for experienced snipers. Through the scope, Sarah could see the RPG team setting up their weapon with practiced efficiency. They had chosen their position well, using a natural depression in the ridgeline that provided protection from the SEAL snipers while giving them a clear field of fire toward Morrison's team. I can see them clearly, Sarah reported, her voice steady despite the pressure of the moment. The gunner is almost ready to fire. You need to take the gunner first, Rodriguez instructed urgently. If you miss, they'll get their shot off, and your boys are in serious trouble. Sarah forced her breathing to slow, applying every technique she had ever learned about precision shooting. At 800 meters, with wind and elevation factors complicating the shot, there was no margin for error. The crosshairs settled on the RPG gunner's center mass, and she began the deliberate trigger squeeze that she was learning to trust. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, and through the scope she watched as her bullet found its mark. The gunner collapsed across his weapon, and the carefully orchestrated RPG attack dissolved into chaos as his teammates scrambled to take over the weapon. Beautiful shot, Rodriguez said, genuine admiration in his voice. That was a tough angle with significant environmental factors. You're shooting like you've been doing this for years. But Sarah was already moving to engage the remaining RPG crew members, understanding that leaving them alive would allow them to reorganize and potentially complete their attack. Her 8th shot dropped the assistant gunner, and her 9th sent the ammunition handler diving for cover behind inadequate rocks. Chun, this is Morrison, the commander's voice crackled through the radio. We can see multiple enemy fighters starting to disengage and move toward the caves. If they reach that tunnel complex, we'll lose them entirely. Sarah could see it happening through her scope. The devastating accuracy of her shots had broken the enemy's defensive coordination, but instead of surrendering or fighting to the last man, they were executing a tactical withdrawal toward positions that would make them nearly impossible to pursue. I count 15 to 20 fighters moving toward the cave entrances, she reported, tracking the movement through her optics. Multiple groups, moving in bounds with covering fire. Rodriguez studied the tactical situation through his binoculars. They're good, he admitted grudgingly. Professional movement under fire. But they're exposed during the transitions between cover points. Can you make those moving shots? Morrison asked over the radio, his voice carrying the weight of a commander who understood that the next few minutes would determine the mission's outcome. Sarah considered the question carefully. Moving targets at extended range represented a significant increase in difficulty, requiring her to calculate not just distance and environmental factors, but also target speed and direction. It was the kind of shooting that challenged even expert marksmen. I can try, she replied, her voice carrying quiet determination rather than overconfidence. But I'll need rapid target designation to make the most of the opportunities. Rodriguez, you're her spotter, Morrison commanded. Call targets and provide continuous guidance. The SEAL sergeant nodded, settling into the role he had trained for throughout his career. Roger that. Multiple target opportunities developing. First group moving from the communications position toward cave entrance alpha. Through the scope, Sarah could see 3 enemy fighters making a coordinated dash across 30 meters of open ground. They were moving fast and using proper tactical spacing, but the movement made them visible against the rocky background of the mountainside. Lead the first runner by 2 feet, Rodriguez coached. Moving target at 750 meters, crossing left to right. Wind is pushing your shots slightly east. Sarah tracked the running figure through her scope, her muscle memory from skeet shooting during her college years unexpectedly proving relevant to this deadly serious situation. The fundamentals were similar: calculating lead time, maintaining smooth tracking motion, timing the shot for when the target would intersect with her bullet's path. Her 10th shot was clean, dropping the lead runner mid-stride and causing the other 2 to dive for whatever cover they could find. But Rodriguez was already calling out the next target opportunity. Second group at your 11 o'clock, for fighters moving in tactical bounds. Take the trail man first. He's providing covering fire for the others. Sarah swung the rifle toward the new targets, finding them through the scope just as they began their movement. These fighters were more cautious than the first group, having seen what happened to their companions, but their need to reach the caves was forcing them to expose themselves repeatedly. The 11th shot eliminated the covering fire position, and Sarah immediately shifted to target the lead elements of the group. Her 12th and 13th shots found their marks as well, demonstrating a level of precision that was beginning to seem almost supernatural to the SEAL team watching from their positions. "Chen, what's your ammunition status?" Morrison asked, his voice carrying professional concern mixed with amazement at what he was witnessing. Rodriguez checked the rifle's magazine and his remaining ammunition pouches. 17 rounds remaining in the rifle, plus 60 rounds in reserve magazines, he reported. "But ma'am, you're shooting faster than we anticipated. Need to be mindful of barrel heating and ammunition conservation." Sarah could feel the rifle's barrel warming under the rapid fire, and she knew that excessive heat could begin to affect the weapon's accuracy. But she could also see that the tactical situation required sustained engagement to prevent the enemy from successfully withdrawing to their prepared positions. "Understood," she replied, forcing herself to slow her rate of fire slightly, prioritizing high-value targets and leadership elements. "Good call," Rodriguez agreed. "Quality over quantity. Make every shot count." Through the scope, Sarah could see that her systematic elimination of enemy fighters was having effects beyond the simple mathematics of casualty figures. The surviving fighters were becoming increasingly disorganized, their disciplined withdrawal beginning to break down under the psychological pressure of accurate fire from an unexpected direction. "Look at them," Rodriguez observed, studying the enemy positions through his binoculars. "They're starting to panic. Professional fighters don't usually break this easily, but they've never dealt with precision fire from that angle before." Sarah could see it too. Individual fighters were beginning to make poor tactical decisions, abandoning their positions prematurely or exposing themselves unnecessarily as they try to understand where the deadly accurate fire was coming from. Their training was solid, but the psychological impact of being picked off one by an invisible sniper was undermining their cohesion. "Target-rich environment developing," Rodriguez called out excitedly. Multiple fighters exposing themselves simultaneously. "Pick your shots carefully." Sarah felt the rhythm of the engagement settling into her bones like a deadly dance. Sight picture, breathing, trigger control, follow-through, bolt manipulation, target acquisition. Each cycle was becoming smoother and more natural, her body adapting to the weapon's characteristics and the tactical demands of the situation. Her 14th shot dropped a fighter who had exposed himself while trying to signal to other positions. The 15th eliminated a leader who was attempting to rally his men for a coordinated movement. Each successful engagement was reducing the enemy's capability while increasing the psychological pressure on the survivors. "Chun, this is Morrison." The commander's voice carried a note of urgency. Large group of fighters massing near cave entrance Bravo. Looks like they're preparing for a final rush to get inside the tunnel complex. Through her scope, Sarah could see what Morrison was describing. Nearly a dozen enemy fighters had gathered in a protected area near one of the larger cave entrances, clearly preparing for a coordinated movement that would allow most of them to reach safety simultaneously. "They're going to move all at once," Rodriguez observed grimly. "Try to overwhelm your ability to engage them individually." Classic breakthrough tactic. Sarah studied the situation through her optics, calculating angles and distances while considering her remaining ammunition and the capabilities of her borrowed weapon. It was going to be the most challenging engagement of an already extraordinary day, requiring her to make multiple precision shots in rapid succession against targets that would be moving fast and using every available piece of cover. I could disrupt their formation, she said finally, but I'll need perfect target designation and rapid follow-up opportunities. You'll have them, Rodriguez promised. I'll call targets in priority order. Trust my guidance and don't second-guess the shots. Sarah settled into her shooting position with the focused intensity of a surgeon preparing for a critical operation. Everything she had learned over the past hour, the rifle's characteristics, the environmental factors, the tactical situation, would need to come together in the next few minutes for what might be the decisive engagement of the entire mission. The massed group of enemy fighters began their coordinated movement with military precision, breaking from cover in 3 separate elements that moved in overlapping bounds toward the cave entrance. Sarah could see through her scope that these were experienced combatants executing a textbook tactical withdrawal under fire, using terrain features and mutual support to minimize their exposure to her devastating accurate fire. First element moving now, Rodriguez called out urgently. 4 fighters, staggered formation, 200 meters to cave entrance. Lead target at your 1 o'clock. Sarah's 16th shot dropped the lead fighter of the first element just as he reached the midpoint of his dash towards safety. The psychological impact was immediate. The remaining 3 fighters of that group lost their coordination and began moving independently, each man now focused on his own survival rather than the group's tactical objectives. Second element, initiating movement. Rodriguez continued his rapid-fire commentary. 5 fighters, tactical spacing, using covering fire. Priority target is the automatic weapons gunner at trail position. The 17th shot eliminated the machine gunner before he could establish a firing position to support his teammates. Sarah could see the remaining 4 fighters of the second element hesitating, their covering fire eliminated and their confidence shaken by the deadly precision of shots they couldn't defend against. Third element holding position, Rodriguez observed through his binoculars. They're trying to decide whether to abort the movement or continue with the plan. Sarah used the brief respite to check her remaining ammunition and allow the rifle's barrel to cool slightly. She had fired 17 rounds in rapid succession, and while Rodriguez's weapon was built for sustained precision fire, she knew that barrel heat could begin to affect accuracy if she didn't manage her rate of fire carefully. Status report. Morrison's voice crackled through the radio. What's the tactical picture from your position? Enemy formation broken, Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. First element scattered, second element pinned down in the open. Third element still in covered position, but hesitating to move. Through her scope, she could see the tactical situation developing exactly as military doctrine predicted. The enemy's coordinated withdrawal had devolved into individual survival decisions, with each fighter now making independent choices about when and how to move. This fragmentation made them more vulnerable to her systematic engagement, but also more unpredictable in their movements. Chun, you've got movement from an unexpected direction, Rodriguez warned suddenly, his voice carrying new urgency. 3 fighters coming down from the high ground at your 3 o'clock. They're trying to flank your position. Sarah swung her rifle toward the new threat, her scope finding 3 enemy combatants who had apparently been positioned as a reserve force on higher ground. They were moving carefully down the mountainside, using rock formations and sparse vegetation for concealment as they attempted to reach a position where they could engage her from an advantageous angle. Range to the flanking element? She asked, tracking the lead figure through her optics while calculating the tactical implications of this new development. 900 meters and closing, Rodriguez replied, working his range finder rapidly. Steep angle, limited cover for them once they reach the main ridgeline. But if they get into position, they'll have a clear shot at our location. Sarah understood the tactical calculus immediately. She could continue engaging the main group near the cave entrance, but allowing the flanking force to reach their objective would put her and Rodriguez in immediate danger. The borrowed sniper rifle that had given her such devastating capability would become useless if she was forced to abandon her position under enemy fire. I need to neutralize the flanking threat first, she decided, her intelligence training asserting itself over the immediate tactical pressures. Can't maintain this position if they get set up on my flank. Agreed, Rodriguez concurred. Take them down fast, then get back to the main engagement. The other groups are starting to recover from the shock of your initial attacks. Sarah's 18th shot reached out across 900 meters of mountain air to find the lead flanking fighter just as he exposed himself while crossing a small saddle in the ridgeline. The bullet's impact sent him tumbling down the rocky slope, and the two remaining members of the flanking element immediately dove for cover. Outstanding shot, Rodriguez said with professional appreciation. Maximum effective range for that weapon system, steep angle, and you made it look easy. But Sarah was already tracking the second target, understanding that she needed to eliminate this threat completely before returning her attention to the main engagement. The 19th shot found the second flanker as he tried to low-crawl between rock formations, and the 20th sent the final member of the group scrambling back toward the high ground in full retreat. Flanking threat neutralized, she reported to Morrison while swinging the rifle back toward the cave entrance. Returning to primary engagement area. The tactical situation near the caves had evolved during the time she had spent dealing with a flanking attack. The scattered elements of the enemy force had begun to regroup, with individual fighters moving independently toward whatever cover they could find. Some were continuing their movement toward the cave entrances, while others had taken defensive positions and were trying to locate her firing position. Multiple targets of opportunity, Rodriguez called out. The enemy is starting to spread out, making individual rushes for the caves. Priority target at your 11 o'clock, fighter with radio equipment. Sarah's 21st shot silenced another communications specialist, ensuring that the enemy's disorganization would continue without the possibility of coordinated command and control. She was beginning to understand that her systematic elimination of key personnel, weapon specialists, leaders, and communications operators was having effects far beyond the simple reduction in enemy numbers. They're starting to panic, Rodriguez observed with satisfaction. Look how they're moving now. No more tactical discipline, just individual survival instincts. Through her scope, Sarah could see that Rodriguez was correct. The remaining enemy fighters were abandoning military tactics in favor of desperate individual attempts to reach safety. Some are making suicidal rushes across open ground, while others were frozen in inadequate cover, paralyzed by the psychological pressure of accurate fire from an unknown location. Chun, this is Morrison. The commander's voice carried excitement mixed with tactical awareness. Enemy cohesion is breaking down completely. Our snipers are starting to get clear shots as the enemy abandons their coordinated positions. Sarah could hear the increased tempo of rifle fire from the SEAL positions as Morrison's trained marksmen began to exploit the opportunities created by the enemy's disorganization. The combined effect of her systematic engagement and the SEAL team's renewed capability was creating a rapidly deteriorating situation for the remaining fighters. Continuing engagement of targets attempting to reach cave entrances, Sarah reported, settling her aim on a fighter who was sprinting desperately across 30 meters of open ground, preventing enemy withdrawal to prepared positions. Her 22nd shot dropped the running fighter within sight of safety, and she could see the psychological impact on the remaining combatants. Several fighters who had been preparing to make similar rushes immediately abandoned their plans and sought deeper cover, understanding that the distance they needed to cover was effectively impassable under her precise fire. Target at your 2 o'clock, Rodriguez directed. Enemy fighter in cover position, but he's exposed to your angle. Looks like he's trying to set up some kind of crew-served weapon. Sarah found the target through her scope. A bearded fighter who was attempting to emplace what appeared to be a mortar tube in a sheltered position that would have been invisible to the SEAL snipers. From her flanking position, however, she could see him clearly as he worked to establish the indirect fire weapon that could have devastated Morrison's team. The 23rd shot eliminated the mortar threat before it could be brought into action, and Sarah immediately began scanning for additional targets. Her ammunition count was becoming a concern. Rodriguez's rifle had started the engagement with a full complement, but her rapid and sustained fire was reducing her available rounds to critical levels. Ammunition status? She asked while continuing to scan the battlefield through her optics. 7 rounds remaining in the current magazine, plus 1 full magazine in reserve, Rodriguez reported. Total of 27 rounds available. We need to make every shot count from here on. Sarah nodded, understanding that her engagement was entering its final phase. She had been extraordinarily successful in disrupting the enemy's coordination and eliminating key threats, but ammunition limitations would soon force her to be even more selective in her target engagement. Priority targets only, she acknowledged. Leaders, weapons specialists, and immediate threats to the SEAL team. Through her scope, she could see that her systematic engagement had reduced the enemy force from approximately 50 fighters to perhaps 15 or 20 survivors, most of whom were now scattered in individual positions with no apparent command structure or coordinated plan. The mission that had seemed impossible an hour earlier was now clearly turning in their favor. Chun, remarkable shooting. Morrison's voice carried genuine admiration. Enemy force is combat ineffective. Most survivors are attempting individual withdrawal rather than continued resistance. But, even as the commander spoke, Sarah could see through her optics that several enemy fighters were still attempting to reach the cave entrances that would provide them with nearly impregnable defensive positions. While their coordination was broken and their numbers drastically reduced, allowing any significant number to escape into the tunnel complex would create ongoing problems for the mission. Still have multiple fighters attempting to reach cave positions, she reported. Recommend continued engagement to prevent establishment of ongoing resistance in the tunnel complex. Concur, Morrison replied immediately. Continue engagement as ammunition permits. My team is maneuvering to cut off remaining escape routes. Sarah settled back into her shooting position, understanding that the final phase of the engagement would require her to make every remaining shot count. The enemy fighters who were still attempting to reach the caves were the most determined and potentially most dangerous survivors, likely to include leaders and specialists who could reorganize resistance if they reached defensive positions. Target priority, Rodriguez said, studying the battlefield through his binoculars. Fighter with heavy pack at 10 o'clock, probably carrying demolitions or heavy weapons. Take him first. Sarah's 24th shot reached across 700 meters to eliminate the suspected demolitions expert, just as he began a final desperate sprint toward cave entrance Alpha. The heavy pack he had been carrying exploded in a shower of secondary detonations that confirmed Rodriguez's tactical assessment. Demolitions confirmed, Rodriguez said with satisfaction. That could have been a serious problem if he'd reached the caves. The secondary explosions from the eliminated fighters' equipment had a devastating psychological effect on the remaining enemy combatants. Sarah could see through her scope that several fighters who had been preparing to make their own rushes for the cave entrances were now abandoning their positions entirely, choosing to retreat up the mountainside rather than continue their attempts to reach the tunnel complex. Large-scale enemy withdrawal initiated, she reported to Morrison. Surviving fighters abandoning positions and retreating toward high ground. Outstanding work, Chun. The commander's voice carried relief mixed with amazement. Mission objectives achieved. You've single-handedly broken an enemy force that had us pinned down and facing potential disaster. Sarah continued to track the retreating fighters through her scope, but the engagement was clearly winding down. The enemy force that had held such a strong tactical advantage just an hour earlier was now scattered and demoralized, abandoning their weapons and equipment as they fled toward whatever escape routes they could find in the mountainous terrain. Rodriguez, she said quietly, finally, allowing herself to relax slightly behind the powerful rifle that had served her so well. Thank you for trusting me with your weapon. The SEAL sergeant's response carried genuine respect and perhaps a touch of amazement. Ma'am, that was some of the finest precision shooting I've ever witnessed, and I've served with the best marksmen in the world. You just took down 50 enemy fighters with 24 shots. That's not just marksmanship, that's combat artistry. The silence that followed the engagement was almost as intense as the gunfire that had preceded it. Sarah remained in her shooting position for several minutes after the last enemy fighter disappeared into the high country, her body still coiled with adrenaline and her mind struggling to process what she had just accomplished. The borrowed rifle that had felt so foreign in her hands just hours earlier now seemed like a natural extension of her body, its weight and balance as familiar as her own heartbeat. All clear on the ridgeline. Morrison's voice crackled through the radio, carrying relief and exhaustion in equal measure. Enemy force has withdrawn. No movement visible in any of the cave entrances. Rodriguez carefully took his rifle back from Sarah, handling the weapon with the reverence of someone who understood that it had just participated in something extraordinary. He immediately began the methodical process of cleaning and inspecting the barrel, checking for any signs of damage from the sustained rapid fire that had characterized the engagement. Betsy performed flawlessly, he said with satisfaction, running a bore snake through the rifle's barrel. No heat damage, no accuracy degradation. She was built for this kind of work. Sarah sat back against the concrete barrier, finally, allowing herself to feel the full impact of what had just occurred. Her hands were steady, but she could feel the adrenaline beginning to ebb from her system, leaving behind a profound sense of exhaustion mixed with disbelief. In the space of less than 2 hours, she had transformed from a military intelligence specialist into someone who had just completed one of the most remarkable sniper engagements in modern military history. "Chun, this is Morrison." The commander's voice carried formal authority mixed with genuine admiration. "Request immediate after-action report. What's your assessment of enemy casualties and capability degradation?" Sarah forced her mind back into analytical mode, drawing on her intelligence training to provide the systematic assessment that would be required for the mission reports. Confirmed eliminates 47 enemy fighters. Probable eliminates 3 additional. Enemy weapons systems destroyed include 2 crew-served machine guns, 1 RPG team, 1 mortar position, and multiple small arms. The numbers sounded almost unreal when spoken aloud, but Rodriguez nodded in confirmation. "I observed and confirmed 32 of those engagements personally. Outstanding accuracy under combat conditions. Enemy combat effectiveness." Sarah continued her formal assessment. "Reduced from approximately 50 fighters in coordinated defensive positions to an estimated 5 to 8 survivors in individual withdrawal. Command and control structure eliminated. Heavy weapons capability eliminated. Threat level reduced from severe to minimal." Morrison's response carried the weight of a professional military officer who understood the tactical implications of what he was hearing. "Outstanding results, Chun. Mission objectives exceeded. Recommend immediate recognition for exceptional performance under combat conditions." The SEAL team began their methodical advance toward the now-silent enemy positions, moving with the careful precision of professionals who understood that even a defeated enemy could still pose threats if proper clearing procedures were not followed. Sarah watched through binoculars as Morrison's men systematically searched each position, securing weapons and gathering intelligence materials that would help analysts understand the enemy's capabilities and intentions. "Chun, you need to see this," Rodriguez said, studying something through his binoculars. "The enemy positions you engaged, the precision of your shots is remarkable." Sarah accepted the binoculars and focused on the ridgeline where the engagement had taken place. Even at distance, she could see the devastating effectiveness of her systematic shooting. Enemy positions that had seemed impregnable just hours earlier were now silent and, abandoned, their occupants eliminated with clinical precision. "Most of your shots were center mass hits," Rodriguez observed with professional admiration. "At ranges exceeding 600 meters, with an unfamiliar weapon, in combat conditions. That's shooting that would challenge snipers with years of specialized training." The radio crackled with reports from the SEAL team as they completed their sweep of the enemy positions. "Intelligence materials recovered," came one report. "Weapons cache located in cave system. Multiple communications equipment sets destroyed by precision fire. Medical supplies and equipment abandoned in place," came another report. "Enemy withdrew without attempting to recover any material. Complete abandonment of position." Sarah listened to the steady stream of reports with growing understanding of the strategic implications of what had occurred. The enemy force had not merely been defeated in tactical combat. They had been so thoroughly disrupted that they had abandoned valuable equipment and intelligence materials in their haste to escape. "Chun, this is Morrison approaching your position for personal debrief." Sarah could see the SEAL commander making his way carefully across the terrain that had been swept by enemy fire just hours earlier. Morrison moved with the confident stride of a professional soldier, but she could see in his body language a mixture of excitement and disbelief that mirrored her own emotional state. "Outstanding work," Morrison said as he reached their position, his voice carrying genuine respect. "I've been leading SEAL operations for 15 years, and I've never seen anything quite like what you just accomplished." The commander settled into a position beside Sarah and Rodriguez, pulling out a field notebook to begin the detailed after-action interview that would be required for official reports. "Walk me through your tactical assessment and decision-making process." What made you realize that you could engage effectively from this position? Sarah found herself falling back into the analytical framework that had served her throughout her military career. The enemy had positioned themselves to counter direct frontal assault from your team's approach vector, but they had exposed their flanks and supporting positions to fire from this eastern position. Classic defensive oversight. They prioritized immediate threat response over 360-degree security. Morrison nodded, making notes as she spoke. And your confidence in your ability to make the required shots. Initially limited, Sarah replied honestly. But the tactical opportunity was so significant that even marginal shooting capability would have had substantial impact. The enemy clustering and target-rich environment meant that even imperfect shots would disrupt their coordination. Rodriguez interjected with his professional assessment. Sir, her shooting was anything but imperfect. 47 confirmed hits out of 48 shots fired. That's sniper-level accuracy under combat stress. Morrison paused in his note-taking, clearly trying to process the implications of Rodriguez's statement. 47 out of 48 shots? At combat ranges exceeding 600 meters. Confirmed, Rodriguez replied. I observed and spotted for most of the engagement. Her only miss was shot number 37. Target moved unexpectedly during trigger squeeze, and the bullet impacted 1 foot left of intended point of impact. The SEAL commander stared at Sarah with the expression of someone trying to reconcile what he was hearing with his understanding of military capabilities and training requirements. Chen, what's your background with precision marksmanship? Your military records show intelligent specialization, not sniper training. Sarah felt a moment of concern that her unprecedented performance might somehow be viewed with suspicion rather than admiration. Standard military marksmanship qualification, plus recreational shooting during college. But no formal sniper training or advanced precision shooting instruction. Recreational shooting? Morrison asked, his voice carrying curiosity mixed with disbelief. Skeet and trap shooting with the university team, Sarah explained. Some long-range target shooting at civilian ranges. But nothing approaching military sniper training or combat shooting. Morrison exchanged glances with Rodriguez, and Sarah could see both men trying to understand how civilian recreational shooting could translate into the kind of combat performance they had just witnessed. She found herself wondering the same thing. How had her limited experience with sporting firearms prepared her for precision shooting under the extreme stress of combat? Ma'am, Rodriguez said thoughtfully, what you just accomplished transcends normal training and experience parameters. That was instinctive shooting at a level that most professionals never achieve. The radio interrupted their discussion with a priority message from higher command. Alpha Team, this is Control. Preliminary satellite imagery confirms substantial enemy casualties in your area of operations. Request detailed casualty assessment and tactical summary for immediate transmission to Theater Command. Morrison keyed his radio while continuing to study Sarah with obvious fascination. Control, this is Alpha Team Leader. Preliminary assessment. Enemy force of approximately 50 combatants neutralized by a single precision shooter. Detailed report to follow. The pause before Control's response was longer than normal, and Sarah could imagine the confusion and disbelief that her performance was generating at higher command levels. Alpha Team, please confirm your transmission. Did you say single precision shooter? Confirmed, Control, Morrison replied, his voice carrying professional certainty. Single shooter, 47 confirmed eliminates. Complete disruption of enemy defensive capability. Understood, Alpha Team. Higher command requests immediate detailed report, including shooter identification and background. This performance will require extensive documentation. Sarah felt a growing sense of unease as she realized that her actions would inevitably attract attention far beyond the immediate tactical situation. Military bureaucracy would demand explanations, investigations, and detailed analysis of how an intelligence specialist had accomplished something that challenged conventional understanding of sniper capabilities. Sir, she said to Morrison, what are the implications of this level of attention? I was just trying to help with a tactical problem. Morrison's expression carried understanding mixed with concern. Chun, what you accomplished today will be studied and analyzed by military professionals for years to come. You've just redefined what's considered possible in precision shooting under combat conditions. Rodriguez added his perspective as someone who had witnessed the entire engagement firsthand. Ma'am, the military is going to want to understand how you developed these capabilities. They're going to want to study your techniques, your training background, everything. But more importantly, Morrison continued, you've just saved the lives of my entire team. If you hadn't been able to break that enemy defensive position, we were looking at potential casualties and possible mission failure. The weight of that recognition settled on Sarah like a heavy blanket. She had been so focused on the tactical problem and the immediate challenges of precision shooting that she hadn't fully considered the broader implications of her actions. 8 highly trained SEAL operators had been in genuine danger, and her unprecedented shooting performance had arguably saved their lives. The recommendation for recognition will be substantial, Morrison said, returning to his note-taking. This level of performance under combat conditions merits significant official acknowledgement. Sarah found herself thinking about the strange sequence of events that had led to this moment. A routine intelligence mission had become a combat engagement, which had become an opportunity for her to attempt something far outside her normal role and capabilities. The borrowed rifle, the unique tactical angle, the enemy's defensive vulnerabilities, all had combined to create circumstances that had allowed her to achieve something that seemed almost impossible in retrospect. Rodriguez, she said quietly, would you have attempted those shots yourself if you had been in my position? The SEAL sniper considered the question carefully before responding. Ma'am, I would have tried, but I'm not sure I could have achieved the same results. The angle was perfect, but the sustained accuracy you demonstrated was extraordinary by any standard. Morrison concluded his preliminary notes and prepared to rejoin his team for the detailed sweep of the enemy positions. Chun, you should know that this engagement will be remembered as one of the most remarkable individual performances in modern military history. 47 enemy fighters eliminated by a single precision shooter in less than 2 hours. That's unprecedented. As the SEAL commander moved away to continue his tactical responsibilities, Sarah remained beside Rodriguez in the position that had become the site of her extraordinary performance. The borrowed rifle had been cleaned and prepared for transport, but she could still feel the phantom weight of the weapon in her hands and the remembered satisfaction of perfect sight pictures and clean trigger breaks. Ma'am, Rodriguez said quietly, I want you to know that it was an honor to serve as your spotter today. What you accomplished was art as much as marksmanship. Sarah looked out across the now peaceful battlefield where the morning sun was beginning to burn off the shadows that had concealed so much deadly drama just hours earlier. She understood that her life had been permanently changed by the events of this day, and that she would forever be known as the intelligence specialist who had picked up a borrowed rifle and achieved the impossible. The radio crackled with final reports from the SEAL team as they completed their mission and prepared for extraction. The operation that had seemed destined for failure just hours earlier was now being hailed as a complete success, and Sarah knew that her name would be permanently associated with one of the most remarkable shooting performances in military history. May I use your rifle for a moment? She whispered to herself, remembering the simple question that had started it all.